Good afternoon, Dr. Randi, and welcome to our podcast, your podcast.
That's our project, actually, because we're sort of mutually supporting one another. I'm getting to teach you things. You're a wonderful audience. You're joyful to listen to me. It's really neat. I like it a lot.
Nice. And today's topic, as interesting as it was last week and previous weeks, is communication gridlocks, no-win interaction patterns. Tell us more about this, Dr. Randi.
Well, it's something I think affects everybody, especially people who've been together for any length of time. They fall into these patterns that they don't even notice they're in. Their kids notice it. A little 8-year-old will say to me, "Why don't we just go wait in the car? Because this is going to take 20 minutes." They can predict exactly what's going to happen. It's like, why don't we just go out and get a cup of coffee and catch the ending? Because it's that predictable, but the people who are locked into these interaction patterns don't see them. So, okay, this is how it looks. People will come into my office, a couple, and they usually have an issue. It could be as bad as an infidelity. It can be as awful as a tremendous money loss. It can be managing a teenager. It could be trying to decide whether or not to move an elderly patient with Alzheimer's into their home. But they come in with an issue and they want some guidance and some help, sometimes long-term, sometimes short-term. But they come in, each of them with a history, with trauma, with sorrow in the relationship and before the relationship. They come in with their own attitudes, their own thoughts, their own feelings. They come in, and all that stuff is swirling around each person. But they don't know how to talk about an issue, because every time they get into an issue that's any difficulty, which is probably why they're with me, they end up in one of these horrendous gridlock lock-ins where they start arguing in a very particularly similar way, and they always end up locked in. They always end up no win. They always end up not resolving the issue. It's very, very sad. So all of a sudden, we're talking about an issue, and I see a gridlock starting. If I don't stop that gridlock, we will have zero resolution, because now the therapeutic issue becomes the gridlock itself. So I will watch this start to happen. As I said, they often don't even realize they're doing it. People around them are. Friends and family will say, "Here they go again." Even distant friends will sort of leave the dining room table because they're not going to break in. This thing is a lock-in. It's going to go until it's done. And both people lose total perspective. They just get locked into this horrible pattern that has no possible good ending. So I can usually identify these very soon, maybe in the second or third session. I can actually play both parts, which surprises people tremendously.
Right.
It's very easy to do it in a little bit of an exaggeration. Let me be you, let me be you. Or you can ask the couple, why don't we switch places? You do her part and you do his part or her part, and find out how that feels. And interestingly enough, they can play both parts. When you are in a Broadway play for 10 years, you can play all the parts. And all of a sudden they'll be embarrassed. Assume that person's posture. Assume that person's voice. Okay, talk the way they're going to talk, and then you talk the way you're. And see what happens. They'll start laughing. It's like, oh my God, is it this obvious? Yes, it's that obvious. Most of my couples don't get mad at me. Most of them will say, we never realized this was going on and stopping us from resolving any issues. We really want to pay attention to what you see, and we really want to change them. And changing them is a whole different subject. We can talk about it another time. Right now, I just want to point them out. So the best thing I can do for them at that time is to give them perspective and to stop them from any negative judgment. I said, let me tell you some of the most common gridlock patterns I've seen. Maybe you find yourself in them, and it will be easier for you to look at them from the outside. But maybe it'll just tell you that you're not alone. That almost every couple, they've been together longer than any small period of time. Man, you can see it coming. It's so obvious. As I said, even the kids can see it coming. So let's talk about some of the gridlock patterns. I'll give you some examples, and maybe that will help. One of them that is awful to watch is when you have a sort of an emotional reactor. This is a person who saves up stuff, and then whether they just explode. They're just emotionally vomiting everywhere. And the person on the end all of a sudden becomes eerily quiet and centered and calm. oh dear, you're having a really bad day. I mean, I had no idea that you were feeling as awful about this. Why don't you just tell me about it? Well, the person that's exploding wants connection. They want drama. They want that person to say, oh, you can't talk to me that way, because they've been aching for some kind of connection that feels real. And so they're exploding, wanting that person to get just as dramatic. And the person gets, as I said, this kind of eerily quiet, robotic response. Well, what does it do? Of course, it gets the person who wants connection to double down. They get worse. They yell more. They scream. And the other person now says, oh, you must be having such a hard time. I really don't know how to help you. This is really difficult. I mean, why don't you just calm down? I mean, take a tranquilizer or something, or have a little and then you can and it becomes so patronizing. You're watching this other person. I'm going, oh man, you are in for getting yourself in bigger and bigger in trouble. For a while, the person just is just exhausted. They start to cry. The other person pats them on the back, tells them it's all going to be okay. And the person walks away feeling guilty and stupid and embarrassed and unbelievably naked. And the other person says, it's all right. And you're just going through a hard time, not acknowledging in any way possible that they could have done anything to have started that going. The person just quiets down and starts to again accumulate irritation, frustration, negligence, whatever. And the other person, as I said, never says, I have to be part of this. I must be suppressing you at other times. Maybe I don't listen well enough to you. Oh, no. They're fine. They're calm. So when I watch this happening and I watch this person exploding and I watch this other person sort of talk, it's an eerie calmness. It's really insulting. So that's one of the patterns, the gridlock patterns. And I have to be able to get people to understand what's happening here. God forbid you're talking about an infidelity and the other person just says, I'm really sorry that happened. And, we're going to have to work through it. No, there has to be more emotion. There has to be more passion. There has to be more response. Right? That's one pattern. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is a pusher versus a withdrawer. This pattern happens over a very long period of time. It's one of the most painful ones for me to watch. One partner really wants connection, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, intellectually. They reach out, they try to talk. The person has more need to give and receive. The other person has much less need to give and receive. And so this person is always trying to engage them. It would be like a little child who had a father and mother who was on their phone. Mommy, 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 mommy. Push and push. And the more that person ignores them, the more they push. And then that person who's a withdrawer justifies withdrawing, because who would want to talk to somebody who's so pushy? So you see this thing go round and round and round and round. Eventually, this withdrawal just justifies their lack of availability. Why would I want to be around you? I can never fill you up. You're always so needy. You're always so hungry. You're always, I don't have that much need for that. And it can be around sexuality. It can be around anything, but it's heartbreaking to watch, because every human being needs to connect. Doesn't matter how old they are. They need to reach out and be acknowledged. They need to feel as if they matter. And so when the person on the other end is reading or preoccupied or on their phone or whatever it is, all of a sudden you feel naked and alone and like you really don't matter. At that particular time, of course, it would be a really good idea to up your value, to say to the other person, listen, I have a lot to offer and you're not interested in connecting. I'll find it somewhere else. But it doesn't happen that way. The person usually gets much more pushy. And you watch this horrible pattern. So I'll watch these people talking, for instance, about a child and that's having difficulty in school. And as I've said before, many people bank shot through a child to what they actually need. And the person will be in the thing saying, look, our child's unhappy. It's really sad. They're really needing more time with you. And then the other person starts to say, well, that's not who I am. I mean, I give what I can. And why are you always complaining about my lack of availability? And then pretty soon they're not talking about their kid anymore. They're locked into their own gridlock. No resolution unless they look at the actual pattern of how they interact, not what they're talking about. So the third one, which is going to be similar to the seventh one later on, but they're actually different in the way they work out, is a kind of a dominator versus a silent rebel. It's a parent-child kind of interaction, as many of these turn out to be. But this dominator is power-oriented and is going to win the argument no matter what. They just don't take prisoners. They out talk, they out yell, they out reason, they cause the other partner to become silent and bury their pains of injustice. And then the other partner gets back later when the person is done establishing their dominance. They've finally decided that you know now who's boss. It could be a woman or a man. None of these apply to a particular gender. And then the person on the other end who's been beaten down gets back sarcastically. They get back with withholding pleasure. They get back by not being available. They get back. They have a whole slew of ways to manipulate, to take away or take that power back in other ways that other person needs them. It's kind of an ugly interaction, because you know that both people are out to control. Both people are out for power. They just do it in a different way. So again, we'll be talking about something, and the man or woman will say something to the other person about, I have an opinion, I have something to say about this, and you don't know what you're talking about. You never know what you're talking about. And let me tell you, other times you don't know what you're talking about. And the other person tries to respond and tries to finally in front of me, gets silent, but you see them planning their revenge. You can actually see it, how they're going to get back at that person later. So the person thinks they've established power. Oh no, they have not. They just in the moment dominated. You look like you're still. Are you? This isn't okay. Okay, number 4. This is awful. This is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. These are people that get in front of me and they haven't.
Yes.
Like this happened to a couple who was going to move his mother in who had Alzheimer's, and all of a sudden they begin attacking each other. How would you know how to take care of my mother? You've never been kinder in a million years. Well, why are you invalidating like this? I'm being really nice to welcome your mother here, and you're already telling me I'm an idiot. Maybe you're the idiot. And I'm sitting there, and it's like, this has been 10 minutes, and they're into a full-blown attack. And they are not talking to the issue, and they're not talking to each other. They are both trying to express underlying frustration, fear of being out of control, something is going to happen they're not ready for, how it's going to affect their marriage. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but they're out to attack one another and out defend the attacks. And it'll escalate extremely quickly. And pretty soon it's like, there's no way to solve anything with two people that become enemies. We have come here to resolve an issue. We have to do the sort of being on the same page, sort of having the same goal, sort of having the same motivation. And now I have two people who are enemies. We are not going to solve the situation of this ailing mother who's going to come into this situation that's never been resolved. But the difference in this kind of attack versus it happened so fast. They'll come in, they'll settle down, we start talking, we start asking each person how they feel and what their position is. Within minutes, they're at each other's throats. And nobody wants to be around these people, because they'll fight at a supermarket, they'll fight at a restaurant. That it just nobody, everybody's, let's go home early or something like that. Okay, the 6th pattern is accuser versus excuser. This is a fascinating pattern to watch. One partner continuously finds fault with the other partner. Everything they do, they nitpick in what you could have done better. How come you said you were going to do this but did something else? They're just constantly nitpicking all the time, accusing, and terrified of being accused. That's how they keep from being accused. And the other person, excuse after excuse after excuse, defending that, well, I was late, I couldn't pick you up. An example would be somebody that's always late. Not an hour, always 12 minutes late. Sometimes it has to do with, having inertia and just not being able to leave one thing to start another, but usually a way of rebelling, being controlled by coming just the same amount of time late. But it can cause tremendous anxiety or irritation in the other person. And the person, God bless it, always has an excuse. And sometimes it's a new excuse. It's like a tabloid of excuses. But the other person, of course, doesn't listen to excuses, because excuses are just no change. It's going to come out of a bunch of excuses. But the person continues doing that. The partner always has an excuse, an attempt to counter and validate the accusation, and they go on and on and on in front of me. So why didn't you take care of this? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy before you went outside the marriage? Well, I didn't want to hurt your feelings. I was talking to other people. You always seem so busy. it's like both people end up completely invalidating each other, which is pretty much what happens in every one of these gridlocks. There's total invalidation. They end in a stalemate. They never solve anything. And until you deal with the gridlock itself, as I said before, you're not going anywhere. So this 7 is kind of like that person that dominates, but it's a little different in the way the other person experiences. This is a predator versus a victim. Now, these are roles people play. They are wedded to them. The self-justifying owner predating upon the other person, but they really have an underlying need to annihilate. It's not just what we talked about before. This is a person who really wants to destroy their partner and put them in their place because that partner is acting up, acting like they have more value, acting like they want an equal relationship. Well, this kind of person, this is not a possibility. And when that person tries to fight back to ask for equality, they act this other person almost a sadistic love of hurting somebody. And watching this is really awful to see because this is what happens. They are out for blood. They're not satisfied until they've destroyed the person. They remind them of every single thing that's wrong with them. They remind them of every single disappointment. They remind them of every single way they have failed, and they go after them, and the other person tries to flaunt. It's almost as if an adult is holding a kid back, and they're hitting back and forth, but they can't stop it because the other person has more power, and the person will keep going. And the more that other person defends, the more they seem to take joy in harming them, or as I said before, putting them in their place. They have to get them to the point where they're broken. And then something very, very weird happens. They start apologizing all over the place. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm having a bad day. I never meant to hurt you. Why are you crying? You know that I just have a temper. They try to get the other person to forgive them. You're going to forgive your annihilator. You're going to forgive your rapist because he or she is sorry they did it. So they knock them to the ground and they can try to resurrect them because it's no fun. It's no fun to annihilate a powerful person. It's no fun. You have to get them to the point where they're broken, and then you get to bring them back. And I didn't mean it, and take all the blame for it. It's awful. So the victim becomes a martyr, a style, a way of the world, and absolutely begins to goad that person. Because if they're going to be on the other end of that kind of a horrendous process, the only way they can take control of it is to make it happen. So they'll start to unconsciously or unconsciously actually get the person to take that position of sadism, because then they wait for the apology afterwards. And then when they won't accept the apology, they get back. This is a really hard gridlock to watch because it's really mean, and it's mean on both parts. Now, some people, women who are in positions where they have no power, third world countries, whatever it is, but those people usually know well enough not to challenge because they're going to get destroyed. But in other societies, whether it's with a woman or the man, I have seen women vicious, just like this, just vicious. And maybe men are more prone to physical violence, women may be verbal, but it's level of the desire to break somebody, to get them to the point where into total control and then apologize. It's got a sort of a wickedness to it. It's one of the ones I hate to see the most. The next one, number 8. It almost makes you want to laugh when you watch it, except the people are hurting. So I would never laugh at somebody who's hurting. But this is a preacher versus an infidel. This is definitely a parent-child interaction. The parent on top, it's a toxic parent-child interaction. The parent on top feels this moral right to preach the right standard of behavior to the other person. This is what's appropriate. What you did is inappropriate. It's unmannerly. You're not acting the way you should act in the world, the way you would talk to a child. But it's a partner talking to a partner and telling them how inappropriate they are, how they act outside the norms, how they embarrass themselves and the partner, how they should act. It's very much on standing from a pulpit. And the other person, of course, doesn't see anything wrong with their behaviors. And the more that person tries to preach to them, the more they become an infidel. Now they're going to rebel, very much like a teenager. And now they're going to do whatever they want to do. And now they're going to embarrass on purpose. Now they're going to get off on rebelling. I'll watch that in my office, and a person will come out at the other person very, very much moral. Well, any good father would know how to do this. What's wrong with you? And the person says, you're not making me into one of those pansy fathers. I'm a different kind of father. I know how to be the kind of father I want to be. And then when you try to suppress me and tell me to be a girl, I'm going to be the kind of father I want. So you see this gridlock happening. It's these gridlocks are so sad for me, other than I'm so excited when I can point them out and a couple wants to change them. Like, oh my God, we actually can start laughing at it. I make them, as I said earlier in this, I make them reverse roles. Okay, now you get to be the preacher and you get to say, I'm not doing anything you want me to do with your finger up. Now you get to be this person who's in charge of annihilation, and you get to be the martyr. Now, how does that feel to play the other person's role? Because you played it so long, you could sit in on that part in Broadway tomorrow. So don't pretend you don't know what this other person's going to say or do, because you've memorized it. So when I watch people look at me and they start to laugh and they start to say, this is ridiculous. We've been doing this our whole lives with each other. Why do we do that? Now we are up and running to really quality couples therapy. And so that's the reward I get for having to participate in this for some period of time before I can start moving it to where it needs to go. The scorekeeper versus the invalidator. Keeping score is a way of holding on to power. You've spent more money than I have 6 times this month, so therefore you have to stop spending money. People keep score. The problem with it is that people will often keep score silently. They don't make their transactional interactions known. There's no agreement. So somebody will give into a psychological bank with a hole in the bottom. And when they come to claim what they feel they've earned, it's not there. If you're going to keep scoring, you better make sure the other person's playing the game by the same rules as you are. Because that person's going to say, I don't agree to the score because I never signed the contract.
Right.
And no power at all. So people who score keep also bring up the past in the present because it makes them feel more powerful. The United States Navy and our therapists all agree that you were really stupid because they don't feel they have any power to do it on their own. Okay. And by the way, I probably could give you 50 of these, but these are the
It's a very popular subject. Communication is the key.
The last one is the disruptor versus an appeaser. People disrupt and pick holes, even when things are going wonderfully well, because they're bored, they're not excited about the relationship. They want to have more interaction, they want to have more excitement, they want to have more adventure, they want to have more. They're bored a little bit by it. And so they start sort of disrupting. They'll just undo things. They just pick at things. It's almost like things are too good to be true, so we got to create a problem. But in reality, things are not too good. If they look too good on the surface, remember, all systems evolve or decay. They're probably decaying underneath, at least for one of the partners. And so that partner becomes a disruptor. They just keep disrupting things in little ways. They nitpick, and they make things uncomfortable. And then, of course, the other person begins to excuse and defend or ignore or keep things from escalating. I think this is nothing that bad. Why are you picking me? What's gone into you? Are you just, like I said, having a bad day? Or why are you trying to disrupt things? We're having a wonderful time, and now you're trying to make it bad. So they accuse that other person of just trying to screw things up. But in reality, it's because that other person needs to screw things up because they are absolutely able to predict every single thing that happens in the relationship, and they are bored to death. That's usually the reason, not just because they're a malcontent or they're just trying to cause problems. They usually have some underlying miscontentment. They're just not happy. So they're trying to make the other person unhappy. So there will be something that changes. When a person says, everything's fine, why are you getting upset? They'll usually double down and pick more things to disrupt because they're not getting what they really need underneath. The appeaser usually pretty much just gives up. And just if they have other attachments in the relationship and they don't want to give it up, they just swallow it and give up. But that chance of disrupting that could cause the disruption towards a new order is gone. It's very, very sad. So those are just 10 But what I want to get across, which is so important, is you can't resolve anything if you are stuck in a gridlock pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Just can't. You've got the pattern becomes the therapeutic goal before anything else can be realized.
And the person that can ungrid this is both ways, right? I mean, but someone has to initiate and
100%. And you have to have two people. But if I can get them both on my side and they can see what a mess they're creating that they never meant to create, they really
Yeah.
wanted to solve the problem. They really wanted to get past it, but they didn't understand what they were doing.
Mhm.
And then you work in therapy to understand what are the traumas that are coming up, what are the underlying dissatisfactions, what this should really be in therapy for.
Right.
And the issue has brought them. But this deeper issue, if we can resolve that, the beauty of that is they begin to solve all their issues much more quickly because they can catch themselves slipping into that. And they say,
Mhm.
what's the real issue? What's the real issue? What's the real issue? We're not really dealing with it. And all of a sudden that becomes better. It becomes better.
Wow, that's a very I mean, like you said, there'll be like 50 more other topics
Oh my
regarding this.
God,
It's a good start.
describe them. But the thing I wanted to say earlier is I can play both parts within 2 hours.
Right.
They're so obvious. I mean, I don't play them as well or as deeply, but I can play them well enough.
Mhm.
People will say, "Do I sound like that?" I say, "Yeah, yeah, you do." Do I say those things? Yeah, you do.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that's going to be an amazing podcast for us, and can't wait to publish this and send it out to our followers.
I would love that.
Great. All right, Dr. Randi, thank you. Until next week.
I'll see you next week.